Curlers, Church, and Whales. Making Sense of Life Through the Eyes of Cancer by Jana West. Section 2. First, the pause. Thankfully, my breast cancer was detected early. After a few weeks of waiting, diagnostics concluded I had stage 1 invasive ductal carcinoma in my left breast, precancerous tissue in my right. The cancer tested estrogen positive, progesterone positive, and HER2 negative. The recommended treatment, bilateral lumpectomy and biopsy of sentinel lymph nodes, followed by 16 consecutive radiation treatments, and then 5 to 10 years of endocrine therapy using a hormone blocker to prevent growth of future cancer cells. Tim and I took it all in, held each other, wept together, and entered into the confusing maze of treatment options. Although my physicians urged me to move quickly, I had concerns about their recommendations. I was learning to remain open, trust my intuition, check in with my values, and slow down. After a sleepless night, I decided to delay treatment until I had time to better understand my diagnosis and see what alternatives were available. I had watched both my parents suffer from the invasive cancer treatments they endured, and I felt the need to do all I could to educate myself before I chose my path forward. During this time, I sought counsel from my primary care physician, 3 local oncologists, and a personal friend who's an MD. I spoke with several out-of-state alternative treatment practitioners. I read what I could, joined 3 online breast cancer support groups, talked with people I knew who had experienced breast cancer, and also with friends of friends. Regret washed over me many times that I did not know more from my deceased mother, a 20-year breast cancer survivor, about her diagnosis and treatment. Instead, I must navigate this terrain without the benefit of her experiences. I spent hours and days trying to become better acquainted with the disease, potential treatments, and their projected outcomes. This effort quickly became taxing, especially with a growing awareness that medical experts do not always agree. During my search, I discovered a few fundamentals about cancer I did not previously understand. A cell will grow and serve the body until its usefulness is completed. At this point, a form of programmed cell death known as apoptosis occurs. The National Center for Biotechnology Information says this highly regulated and controlled program can be initiated by cell stress. A cell becomes cancerous when its programming is overridden, and a cell continues to multiply in spite of conditions that merit its ending. In other words, unlike normal cells that are serving the needs of the body as a whole, survival becomes a cancer cell's predominant motive and at the risk and expense of the body's ecosystem. Let me read that to you one more time. Unlike healthy cells that are serving the needs of the body as a whole, survival becomes a cancer cell's predominant motive and at the risk and expense of the body's ecosystem. In a 2013 article published in the National Library of Medicine, cancer cells are described as employing instruments to circumvent their built-in programming in order to survive and proliferate. Quote, cancer cells adopt various strategies to override apoptosis. Unlike normal cells, cancer cells are under constant stress. End quote. Let this sink in. While under constant stress, a cell can abandon a natural allegiance to the well-being of neighboring cells, thereby putting the health of its entire world, the body, in jeopardy by going rogue, rejecting its natural programming, continuing to consume and multiply. Along with well-known indicators, environmental toxins, poor lifestyle choices, and genetics that produce a cell stress response, there are also growing bodies of research that indicate I might benefit from looking into stress-inducing events including ones in my distant past, and their lasting impact on my body. This research brought a whole new set of questions to the forefront for me. What might I be able to learn to establish better tools for alleviating stress? What ideas flood my nervous system with stress-inducing emotions such as dread or fear? What mechanisms and beliefs have been modeled for me? How do those around me and their ideas impact my response to stress? When I encounter stressful events, are there harmful coping skills I employ to deal with my emotions? Ultimately, could learning to better manage stress help prevent a cancer recurrence? In 2008, our daughter Sarah moved away from the Midwestern United States, where most of her family remains, to the East Coast to pursue training in herbal medicine. She has since made her home in Vermont. Sarah came back to Iowa in 2020 for an extended stay during her treatments for ovarian cancer. After my diagnosis, I called Sarah, a cancer survivor, seeking her support. She asked my permission to reach out to her network of holistic health practitioners for resources that might help me. Eventually, I enlisted a mix of Western and Eastern medical modalities. The Western team worked to eradicate the immediate threat with surgery, biopsy, and radiation. The Eastern team, a direct result of Sarah's connections, uses nature-based classic Chinese medicine. They started with deep listening, asking questions about my history and my experiences. Next came trauma resolution, art therapy, body work, acupuncture, and herbal medicine, all in an effort to provide a restorative treatment environment and to attempt to understand what had disrupted my body's ability to function. Their aim was to restore my body's innate ability to heal itself and maintain health. My introduction to classic Chinese medicine started with a phone conversation with Sarah's mentor, Michael D'Agro. Michael is an interdisciplinary artist, psychotherapist, Chinese medicine clinician, researcher, and educator. He lives and works in Michigan. Tim and I spoke with him the first time over the phone for around an hour. He asked about my diagnosis, my feelings, past experiences, and concerns. I remember after the conversation thinking it was rare to find a clinician who welcomed spending time to adequately listen. At the end of our conversation, Michael said he wanted to think about my situation and investigate some options before giving me his recommendations, another trait that made our interaction both unusual and refreshing. Soon after, he would offer a connection to his mentor, a world-renowned physician who would sometimes meet with a patient of his student for the sake of instruction. Thanks to this introduction and a great deal of generosity, I started meeting online with Dr. Edward Neal, MD, MSOM, medical doctor, Master of Science, Oriental Medicine. Dr. Neal has been in clinical practice for over 30 years and is the director of the Nanjing Institute at Apricot Grove in Portland, Oregon. His students come from around the globe seeking alternative methods to expand their medical practices. From the beginning, Dr. Neal's approach was dramatically different from my other clinical experiences. His intake form was very detailed, making an effort to understand and document my background. We began to meet online weekly with a small group of his students, and I noticed how exceptionally gentle and thoughtful those interactions were. Unlike some other alternative practitioners I had spoken to, Dr. Neal was careful not to discredit my local medical team. He sees his role as compatible and complementary to the standard Western approach. Dr. Neal states the importance of inquiry, quote, "It is less useful to identify a specific syndrome and arrive at an answer than it is to continually ask the question, what does healing look like at this moment, in this person, here on this day?" In medicine, as in life, questions are generally more meaningful to us than answers. This is because answers close doors, while questions open them. Most human illness arises in a dimension hidden from our conscious awareness. Their deeper treatment, too, resides within this space. While we have now become experts at describing the secondary manifestations these patterns produce, we are largely blinded, like sleepwalkers, to their deeper, true nature. As a result, the majority of our treatments are only partially effective, representing an accepted compromise, not a true cure." End quote. After I completed surgery and radiation in our home state of Iowa, Tim and I traveled to Oregon so I could be treated in person by Dr. Neal. He also invited us to attend a practicum in Trout Lake, Washington, with his students. The experience of being in his company and under his care has been life-changing. Although distance prevents ongoing in-person treatments, I continue to learn from his video series, The Apricot Grove on YouTube, and I am engaged in tending to my body in ways he introduced to me. During my first meeting with Dr. Neal, he expressed how important it is to find ways to communicate with my body. Dr. Neal suggested I start by adding to my treatment plan art, music, dream work, journaling, and a consistent attentiveness to my symptoms. He also asked me to consider thinking of my cancer cells in a new light. Quote, "We've been told the story that cancer is our enemy and that we are at war with cancer. The cancer is not only in you, it is you. Cancer is a distress response of your cells." End quote. Dr. Neal told me that the cells affected by cancer are like kids lost at a mall, disoriented and confused. As I learn to listen to my body, I can become an important advocate in the restoration of my body's natural inclination to heal. Neijing nature-based medicine sees disease as the result of blockage in the body's natural systems. The goal, then, is to discover the blockage, understand its origins, and do what we can to help restore the body's natural and healthy ecology. Through my efforts to find treatments that go beyond the current standard of care offered by Western medicine, I also found local practitioners whose methods complement concepts I learned from Dr. Neal. I enrolled in a mind-body class led by Sherilyn Rickers, mental health nurse practitioner, at the Holistic Mental Health Practice Time to Thrive in Clive, Iowa. The class teaches ways to practice self-care and manage stress using writing, art, breath, guided imagery, dance, and mindfulness. I use a number of the tools introduced in this class regularly as part of my wellness practice, and have found they can be implemented easily in almost any situation. As I reflect on the impact of this mind-body class, I'm reminded of the day of my lumpectomy on February 26, 2024. My surgery took place about midway through this 8-week course. Michael had worked with me the day before my surgery to help alleviate my anxiety using a trauma resolution art therapy similar to EMDR. The tools from the mind-body class were also fresh in my mind, and I am so glad. I was able to put them into practice that day. I believe the combination of alternative treatments I had been using completely changed the trajectory of the day's events. On the morning of my surgery, I was stressed. I nearly skipped cancer treatments altogether because of my difficulty trusting the medical industry, but I made it to the radiology clinic for the process of inserting guide wires into my breasts. These would guide my surgeon later that day to the exact locations in both breasts. My technician seemed tense. She didn't say why, but I noticed she was a little rough and seemed distracted. After I changed into my gown and completed a painful mammogram, she showed me back to a tiny closet, quote, changing room, end quote, where I was instructed to wait a few minutes. There I sat, half-dressed, on a hard bench, in a tiny room, for the next hour. After about 10 minutes, I started to panic. Part of my fractured personality, maybe one created as a teenager, when I was tired of abuse and neglect, showed up, and she was pissed. She started telling me how things were. Something like, "This is bullshit. These people don't give a shit about me. I'm just money to them. How dare she leave me here so long? Fuck her. This is my chance. Get dressed. We're out of here. I broke into a sweat. What would I do? Will I get dressed and leave? I was seriously considering getting dressed and going home. Then I recalled some of my mind-body class information. For the next 30 minutes or so, I started working through my mind-body skills. Body scan, breathing, dialogue with a symptom. After all this, I began to calm down. I remembered Dr. Neal's instructions about how to listen to my body. He had suggested I consider the surgery like a sacred portal, and that the people taking care of me today were there to help me with an important transformation. I began to pray for them. Then, when the pissed-off protector in me showed up again, I tried to calm her fears, remembered the pain that created her, and spoke to her like the wounded child that she is. I promised to protect her and asked her to wait there with me. This wait became part of my preparation. While I waited, I went from terrified, hostile, and a flight risk to peaceful and pleasant. When the technician returned after 45 minutes to apologize for the wait and explain that a computer system that runs the office had crashed that morning, I was able to respond with kindness and waited another 10 or 15 minutes. After an hour in that closet, I was ready for the pain, confusion, and unpleasantness my day had in store, and interacted with all my guides that day with humor, empathy, kindness, and peace. I was no longer a victim of disease. I became a willing participant in the journey, open, intuitive, deeply in touch with my values, and able to proceed on the journey without hostility, fear, or dread. Another important local resource came to my attention while I was still considering all my treatment options. Information about integrative oncology had surfaced, and I wanted to know how that approach might differ. So I asked my primary care doctor if she could recommend an integrative oncologist. Maybe she was becoming frustrated with my indecisiveness, but she told me switching my treatment team at that point was not a good idea. I dropped the conversation with her and turned to the internet to see if there was an integrative oncologist in my area. This is how I found a local resource just 6 miles from my home, the Mercy One Richard Deming Cancer Center. I called the office and was surprised how easy the appointment was to schedule. I made it clear that I needed a second opinion and my surgery was just 2 weeks away. They got me in right away. Every interaction I had that day, from the way the office was decorated, to my visit with the nurse, to my time with Dr. Deming, was what I would identify as trauma-aware. The staff is thoughtful and sensitive to the difficult experiences cancer often brings. Each time I meet with Dr. Deming, he is personable, takes time to get to know me, and exudes kindness, even joy. At our first meeting, he gave me the same basic recommendations I had consistently heard from the other doctors. But then he handed me a list of additional resources for me to consider. Dr. Deming and his team offer integrative oncology, which is strikingly different from my other clinical encounters and obviously intent on a more compassionate and comprehensive approach. At this practice, treatments were tailored by paying attention to the space, careful interactions, and all-around more sensitive methods. Plus, the practice also offers mindfulness coaching, nutrition education, body work, art therapy, music therapy, all of which I personally benefited from, as well as other treatments that would be considered outside the current medical standard of care. Many of these additional treatments are provided at no cost to patients and available due to generous private donors. This is where I met Marcus Walsh, LMT, BCTMB. Marcus's approach to medical bodywork was helpful. He also facilitated my 8 sessions of MABT, Mindful Awareness in Body-Oriented Therapy. MABT is a somatic therapy focused on increasing interoceptive capacity, which is learning to sense and receive information from your body about its internal state. I found MABT very meaningful and instantly applicable in my quest to better communicate with my own body. The combination of all these treatments has gently moved me from the trauma of invasive procedures past what modern medicine calls in the U.S. the standard of care, and into the fully supported healing and self-care habits I have hoped for and searched to find for so many years. It's important to note that unlike my history, I did not bounce from the unexpected impact of my diagnosis headlong into whatever came next, but instead intentionally chose to remain open, trust my instinct, check in with my values, and slow down. Because of this, I found care that is key, not only for my recovery from breast cancer, but also to improve the well-being of my mind, body, and soul by addressing stress, trauma, and pain. Because I had time to investigate my options, I also discovered there is evidence that supports the idea that these additional treatments could also help prevent cancer from recurring. There is growing evidence linking cancer to stress. Stress and cancer. There have been a number of known precursors for disease in my life that could have been avoided. I began smoking and experimenting with drugs as a teen. After college, I ended up in a highly stressful line of work and remained in that environment nearly 30 years. I was diagnosed with an eating disorder at 35, and I struggled with clinical depression for decades. While in my 30s, I was hospitalized 3 times under suicide watch after an attempt to end my life. Although I stopped regular use of street drugs in my 20s, quit smoking, received professional help for the eating disorder and depression, and eventually walked away from a toxic profession, my lifestyle choices have no doubt been contributing factors to the cumulative condition of my body. But why did I choose these behaviors in the first place? The gnawing sense that all is not well and the questions that accompany it have haunted me most of my life. That same sense came to tug on my sleeve yet again with the cancer diagnosis, and this time my life may depend on giving it my full attention. Now, because of cancer, I have renewed impetus and many new resources I did not have in the past. Why did a little girl so full of wonder and love for her family, God, and her world grow to doubt her value to the point of willful neglect and self-abuse? How did this happen? What causes this deterioration of the way I see myself in the world? Both of my parents suffered from the ravages of this disease. They had their own set of experiences and choices. What did we have in common? Could the remedy I have long sought out there somewhere be found inside of me? Are there more precursors of disease amidst the seeming minutiae of the ways I cope with stress? Are there corrosive thought patterns, especially when coping with stress, I fail to notice? If I'm able to identify these, could relief become more attainable and more sustainable? One question is particularly troubling. Why isn't our healthcare system developing more non-chemical stress management tools to prevent disease and instead focuses mainly on sickness instead of health? No doubt stress is a normal part of life and how our body manages change. It's not necessarily bad or harmful, but when stress turns into a regular, unresolved, and long-lasting feature, it can make us sick. According to the Cleveland Clinic, chronic stress is defined as, quote, long-term stress that goes on for weeks or months. You may experience chronic stress due to marriage troubles, issues at work, or financial problems. It's important to find ways to manage chronic stress because it can lead to health issues." End quote. When I started to consider the role stress might play in cancer, it was very easy to see that I had been experiencing chronic stress prior to my diagnosis, and that I did not possess the skills to properly manage it. As I attempt to put the pieces together, I can identify quite a few seasons when stressful events lasted for months, wreaking havoc on my personal life. Instead of stress being a short-term response from my nervous system, ongoing stressful events triggered shifts in my mood and behavior that I did not know how to turn around. Narrowing my focus to the 3 years before cancer visited me, I experienced major stressors related to a pandemic, both our daughter and my mother facing cancer diagnoses, a job loss, a new job that was exceptionally stressful, my mother's decline, becoming her full-time caregiver, my mother's death, and my role as executor of her estate in the midst of broken relationships in my family. My mother died in our home on July 26, 2023. In the months after my mother's death, I occasionally found myself walking around in a circle, unable to string together a cohesive thought or even decide to sit down. I was numbing with alcohol, feeling isolated from my family, living in fear that my estranged family could interfere in Mom's estate, causing yet another crisis. I was in need of closure that was still months away, and I was desperate for an exit from my reality. Being with my mother as she declined and died was what I wanted, and I am so very glad she allowed us to provide such intimate care in our home. Still, the stress was unlike anything I've ever experienced. I did the best I could to provide loving, safe, and compassionate care, but I also have regrets that haunt me. I cannot help but rethink decisions we made, wondering if there was something more I could have done to improve her quality of life and her death experience. Initially, this rumination over the events that led to her death caused a grief so desperate. One day, weeks after her death, I stood outside speaking to the sky, asking for an end to my life. I did not believe I could withstand the weight of my perceived failures or my existence any longer. It was a dark, lonely, confusing time. By the end of that year, I was utterly and completely depleted. Looking back, I now realize I had become the primary caregiver for both of my parents in escalating degrees for 7 consecutive years. The stress state had become both chronic and toxic. By 2023, it was crushing, possibly more so than my body could withstand. I cannot help but wonder, did my grief, triggered by long-lasting stress and without the skills to properly manage, become the proverbial last straw for my body? The stories we tell ourselves. One of the primary postnatal causes of human illness identified by Dr. Neal is emotional disease. Emotion is our response to our experience of the world. As we experience life, information is absorbed through our body. Evidently, the brain then does its best to interpret the data and make a plan to help keep us safe. Does this plan or story then become embedded, not just in the way we think, but in our responses to future events? Experience informs the ways we respond to events, governs choices we make, and impacts our life dramatically. But what if the story we believe is based on incomplete data or assumptions, or is not true at all? What if the story is attached to a specific situation and the response is automatically applied in a similar but different situation? And what happens to old stress that is not fully resolved? I started to realize stress responses created decades, possibly even generations ago, can remain trapped in the body and the ramifications can be harmful. More and more health professionals are starting to talk about the harmful effects of stress. On the forefront of the topic is Dr. Gabor Mate, a Canadian physician with a background in family practice. His work on the effects of trauma and addiction on human health have put him in the public eye as he practices medicine, then lectures and writes about his findings. Our current medical diagnostic model falls short when answering a question put to it by Dr. Mate. Quote, "What are the underlying events and dynamics that animate the perceptions and experiences in question? There's a very simple pathway between stress and malignancy, through the nervous system, through the immune system, and through the hormonal apparatus, and by the agitation and the promotion of cancer-producing genes in the body." End quote. Dr. Mate also says, quote, "Now the reality is that when you talk to people, you often find childhoods of severe stress, and very often trauma, and that's where they learn these patterns. And not only that, we know that childhood stress and trauma cause physiological changes. It changes how your genes work. It changes how your immune system works. It increases inflammation and promotes the onset of disease, including cancer." End quote. In his book, The Myth of Normal, Dr. Mate goes to painstaking lengths to dissect cultural presuppositions regarding the state of normalcy. He suggests that our idea of normal consists of a combination of ideologies and related experiences that are incompatible with a healthy existence and are causing our society to fall into illness and dysfunction that have the power to do great harm. I highly recommend you read his book. Dr. Mate's findings indicate early childhood stress responses can become habits. The brain is constantly scanning our environment, looking for similarities that could indicate a threat. For instance, if a swimming pool has been in some way threatening to you, maybe a childhood swimming accident, your body may sense pools are dangerous. Without realizing it, simply being in close proximity to a swimming pool could cause your nervous system to release stress hormones in preparation for a struggle to survive. The implications are endless. These powerful patterns are a fabulous feature of our highly evolved body, but some can become habits that need to change with new circumstances. And all too often, that never happens. Let this sink in. Stressful events from your past can continue to cause a stress response from your body for years to come, without you even realizing it is happening. Harvard-trained and published neuroscientist Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor experienced a stroke at age 37. In her book, My Stroke of Insight, Dr. Taylor brilliantly documents the insights she learned about the way our brains function from the unique perspective of recovering the use of the left side of her stroke-affected brain. She explains how our brains create stories based on incoming data. These stories may or may not be true. Still, they become thought patterns and thought loops that influence our choices and habits. In her book, she writes, quote, "I need to remember, however, that there are enormous gaps between what I know and what I think I know. I learned that I need to be very wary of my storyteller's left brain potential for stirring up drama and trauma. In the same vein as my left brain enthusiastically manufactured stories that it promoted as the truth, it had a tendency to be redundant, manifesting loops of thought patterns that reverberated through my mind over and over again." End quote. Although my breast cancer was removed in February 2024, I have a new interest in actively reducing my risk of cancer recurrence. There are many voices talking about diet and lifestyle, but I now believe I also have a vested interest in looking more closely at what stories may have created a stressful environment for my cells. If I consider my life, and with a keen awareness of my thought life, can I discover any of my own perceptions that induce an unhealthy stress response? Can those stories I've been telling myself for years be identified and reinterpreted through a more mature and informed lens, thereby forming a new thought pattern with the potential for improved stress response? Maybe, but I have nearly 6 decades of habitual stress responses. So where in the world do I begin? Thankfully, my sweet mother left me some clues in the most unlikely place, my baby book.
It's tempting just to numb what I feel when I'm feeling way too much. But I know emotion delayed can gather steam. Down the road a little thing just might set me off and hurt someone I love with words I can never redeem. My silver strands can testify this wisdom is true. Get to know the fire inside of you. Welcome her in, just like an old friend who's showing you the way. Allow her to stay as long as it takes. Let her speak her mind, even if she's outing all your secrets. And gaze into the mirror of her eyes. Maybe you can't recall that day when your words cut me down to size. Would it surprise you to know I played it back at least 1,000 times? They say words can be weaponized, stay inside you all your life and change the way you see the world. I can face the pain, make room to be, feel everything that memory brings, and find a way to set it free. Welcome her in, just like an old friend who's got something to say. Don't turn her away until you hear her out. Let her speak her mind, ease her worries, and voice her regrets. There's history here you may not yet recognize. Or she may hang around just to spite you and fear how she can be a shy one. But if you can win her trust, her witness alchemy. Sometimes it's best to hesitate when your heart is racing, and spend a little time with pain and fear. Welcome her in, just like an old friend who's showing you the way. Allow her to stay as long as it takes. Allow her to stay just as long as it takes.